Beautiful.
There we go.
I think we are on.
There it goes. Awesome. So, well, thank you, Ash, for that that initial introduction to our session today. As Dr. Ash was saying, this is the Pop Climate Leadership Conversations, a tribute to our chief mentor. And this whole project aims to strengthen youth leadership and explore different tactics that empower the youth to take action and tackle the most pressing environmental issues faced globally. We have been conducting a series of conversations on leadership strategies, recommendations, reflections, and examples, and each is focused on a different leader and a different pressing environmental issue. So far, this is our 51st conversation. So we are very, very excited to have the pleasure of speaking with Steve Smith, the CEO of GKI, here with us today.
GKI.
JKI. There we go. Well, if you're okay with it, Steve, before going into the questions, I would love to introduce you with the bio you have provided for us. So for everyone who's here with us today or listening in through the live stream, Steve joined JKI as a CEO in August of 2023. He brings over 35 years of experience as a senior executive, funding, operating, advising, and investing in different initiatives in technology, media, energy, life sciences, and financial services across the globe. He's excited to bridge his business acumen and experience in sustainable investment to enhance JKI's impact. GKI, sorry, I keep confusing the J and the G.
Global Knowledge Initiative. So yeah, that's what GKI is. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for adding that, Dr. Ash. To continue, Steve began his journey in venture operations at GE and later Ritchie Capital, Global Technology Investments, and Pegasus Capital. For the past several years, Steve has continued to work with dozens of early-stage companies as an advisor to raise capital and business development initiatives. His early professional years were spent in strategy consulting, where he worked with Booz Allen in New York, Dallas, and Singapore. Throughout his career, Steve has supported global development activities, including aquaculture in the US and Africa, financial inclusion in Indonesia, Mexico, and Poland, distributed energy in Africa and the Middle East, water access in Mumbai, off-grid lighting with Light a Billion Lives in India, and malaria mitigation technologies with the Fund for Global Good. In his new role, Steve seeks novel ways to leverage private capital to scale and sustain the company's systems-informed innovation platforms, which need to balance global goals and solutions with locally determined strategy, priority, and implementation. So thank you so much, Steve. We have prepared a series of 5 questions that we would love to ask you in order to get a better feel of what leadership means to you. So I would hand it over to Dr. Ash so he can ask our first question of the session.
Thank you very much. I would just want to start off by once again conveying my gratitude to Steve for everything he does, has been doing, and continues to do, and now in his new role at the Global Knowledge Initiative. And we have had the good fortune of connecting with him, certainly through the WSDF, the World Sustainable Development Forum, but also through his role at GKI, and are really looking forward to partnering. I think there's some fantastic toolkits that GKI has produced, and I believe there's an amazing synchronicity with the work and the principles that drive the work at GKI and the POP movement. And I think the youth of the world that we're working very closely with would benefit a great deal. So I think there's just so many levels of amazing synchronicity. And to take over from where you left off, Anna, we're focused on this leadership conversation as a tribute to late Dr. R.K. Pachauri, and it's a great privilege and honor to hear from you, Steve, on what your to you in essence leadership really is, what it means to you, and through the work that you continue to trailblaze. We would love to hear what those values are, and also how young people can be inspired by it. Thank you.
So, I've been thinking a little bit about the topic. Obviously, you guys shared the questions the other day. I knew leadership was a component of that. And I'm 65 years old. I just had my birthday last week, by the way. And
many happy returns of the day.
I know it just keeps coming. It's always good to get a wish happy birthday. But
very happy birthday.
But I would say that leadership is something that is hard to put your finger on. It takes many different forms. And I personally am still learning a lot about what I need to do to be a good leader. And so there certainly is not an answer or any one way to lead. I think that the core of leadership starts with being your authentic self and being true to yourself. And there are many different styles of leadership. I thought one way to get into this subject was to talk about 3 people that I know that I think are maybe the best leaders that I worked for or worked with. And each one sort of had a different approach. The first one I would point out was a gentleman named Gary Wendt, who was the CEO of GE Capital. So sort of a traditional business organization that had a CEO leader at the top of it. It was obviously GE, one of the oldest at the time, the most profitable and most valuable company in the world when I was working for him. I worked for him for a number of years, from 1990 till about 1998, either directly or just maybe one step off, but very much in his sphere all of that time. And at that time, we grew to be the largest financial services company and most profitable financial services company, operating in, I don't know, 100 countries around the world, and 28 different businesses. So it was a lot of little entrepreneurial efforts all rolled into one big successful operation. And what he was the master of keeping things small and finding a passionate leader that he gave a lot of rope and delegation and inspiration to. And his first answer was always yes or maybe, not no, right? So you could bring in the wildest idea, and if once you developed a little credibility with him, he knew that there was probably a kernel of something in there worth exploring. And he was always about finding that new opportunity, not being locked into just what the company had done before. And in fact, understood that the company always had to be evolving and to be able to be successful. And that I think today that's probably more obvious because the speed of change is so much. But 30 years ago, technology was really first making its way into disrupting sort of the traditional world. And most of his peer group were very comfortable in the status quo. And so the bar to get new stuff approved was very high, because a lot of times they would put you in a position that you couldn't prove it, because it was something you were trying to get them to do something new, and you could never guarantee them that it was going to be okay, because you would have to go do it first. So I found him to be, a very inspirational person. He managed a large organization. I think a lot of people felt personally close to him. And the day that he left GE, I remember I cried, actually. He called me up to let me know that he was leaving. And I realized I had really been coming to work for myself, but also partly because I really was invested in this leader and I had had very good success. I had moved very quickly, and he'd sent me to places like Poland and Japan and Mexico and India, and I had gone into all these, I had pushed GE into lots of new technologies, and I really developed a lot of confidence, and it really, so I really credit him with that, and I've never really come across personally another leader with exactly that skill set. A second leader who was equally amazing and probably even more impactful in my life is my wife, Alice. And she is possibly the most talented person I've ever known in my life, and one of the greatest hands-on leaders I've ever known. And I think that there is a real trend now to looking for leaders who get dirty and work shoulder to shoulder, as opposed to up on high delegating and talking down. And she's a leader, whether she's doing something by herself or in a small group or in a community, and across so many different domains. She's an artist, she's a desktop publisher, she's a mechanical genius, she's a personal trainer, she's a nutritionist, but she's a project manager non-parallel. She works in all kind of areas across the community. She manages this massive community garden, and she's always looking for new challenges, and always looking for, and never satisfied, constantly editing and revising, and looking for different ways. When I was a kid, I lived in a family. My dad worked for IBM, kind of a traditional family. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. We moved about every 2 years. So we would move into a new house, the furniture would get set down and nothing would change. And then we would move again. And my parents finally settled in Wilton, Connecticut in 1970. They'd still live in the same house today, 52 years later. And everything is pretty much where it was sat down when it got there. It's very comfortable. It's very homey, but there's not a lot of innovation going on, maybe on the technology side, but the furniture and the pictures, they're all pretty static, right? And I know at my house with Alice, every day you might come into a room that was the dining room yesterday, and the next day it's an art studio, or it just constantly looking for new approaches. So I've just always been very impressed by her creativity and her self-sufficiency. And she draws to her people who are passionate like her about whatever that is. So she works in particularly kind of I think it's hard for that kind of leader sometimes to scale to they're not a manager, right? And so unlike Gary Wendt, who was probably a very talented deal guy and corporate development guy and business manager at GE, but he was very good also at presiding over 100 people, doing that and knowing how to be a coach and an advisor, inspirer, and so forth. This is more of a leader who is really in the action, operationally, process oriented. And so there's a certain scale that kind of person can get to with everybody on the team. But sometimes they have trouble translating that. I don't want to say maniacal, but just that passion. It's hard. It's not necessarily something you can teach. The third great leader is a fellow I know named Dr. Pachauri. And his particular leadership, well, he had he operated on a lot of different levels, because obviously he had Terry, he had the Delhi Sustainable Development Conference, but I'm talking in particular about his work with the IPCC. And it's come back up a little bit recently, the Nobel Prize that he won with Al Gore. And it's really remarkable when you think about someone who took control of an existential crisis for the world on a long time scale with something that can't be seen, greenhouse gases, and coalesced all these institutions, countries, and so forth to come together at a very slow pace or very small gains along the way, but trusting in the science and the collaboration of the other 2,000 people that were working underneath him to continue to build brick by brick what he intuitively already understood, and which, clever people like him knew was the truth, but being patient and resilient and collaborative and humble. And it was a remarkable thing to be by his side quite a bit during those years and watching how he operated. And so so I think, there are many other, I'm sure, types of leaders we could point to, but I think the point there is, for each situation, there's a leadership style that probably is optimal, but for each individual, they need to find inside them the leadership that can drive their own activity, how to lead themselves. And I know for me, I can tend to be, I'm kind of a nutty professor a little bit. I'm always, the shiny object captures me, and I may put down the task that I need to accomplish to go chase something that's more interesting to me in the moment. Maybe that's ADHD. I don't know. And so so I'm a bit of a challenge as a leader, because I'm not singularly focused, maybe like a traditional leader might be thought to be. But I think that for the individual themselves, you have to find that balance. You want to make sure you stay open to the world, creative. Life is made up of many different threads. It's not one thing. And putting everything you have into one thing sometimes is required for parts of time to really accomplish things, but it can come at a cost. And so I think you have to constantly be checking yourself to make sure that the person that you are and the role that you're playing are aligned, and that you're not playing a role and ignoring the person that you are. So I think and so authenticity may be a word, alignment may be a word, but to be a good leader, I think takes self-awareness and also understanding of what your real passions are, and but also what your limitations are or your boundaries are. So, I'm not an expert, but those are some observations from being on the planet for a while.
That's beautiful. Steve, I just want to say that I loved the fact that you said you're learning, and as you're going, and growing as you're going, and the truth about being true to yourself, and finding that that alignment is so critical. And I know you described sort of pursuing new avenues or possibilities, as and when they arrive, and that might sort of be whatever you want to call it, the ADHD, whatever. But I just want to say, at the pace, and you alluded to this, the pace at which things are changing, it's so important also to be willing to see the opportunity and seize the moment. So I think in a way, today, maybe that is is also a very important element of leadership, being able to identify the opportunity and then go after it. And sometimes it means sort of configuring priorities, maybe even on the fly, but just the rate at which things change, makes it so important to be dynamic in that sense. And I truly appreciate the examples that you shared with us. I think those just make that learning living and breathing for us. And I hope all of us can keep close to our heart the many beautiful things you shared, including the openness to newness, new ideas, and supporting people we work with. Just in the spaces we have the good fortune of connecting with them, and being open to ideas and creative opportunities. And I think that all of those things are so critical. So I think you've shared this could be a conversation just about that first element of what we are touching on today. But I think you've left us a lot to think about, and I think your wisdom and your values, your experience are amazing. I do want to say that would be incredible to get to meet with Alice. It sounds like she's doing so many things at so many levels that are incredibly meaningful. And I know you seek inspiration from her, and I know all of us will too, if we have the good fortune of connecting. So I hope we will. And I did want to ask.
She was lucky enough to travel with me to India a couple times and met with Patchy. She attended one of the Delhi Sustainable Development conferences, so she's an honorary member of our team, I think.
Oh, we're blessed. We embrace her with our hearts and feel deeply and profoundly grateful, and hope we'll have a conversation with her too. Maybe the two of you together one of these days as follow up to this one. And I did want to ask you what date your birthday is.
October 4th.
Many happy returns once again. And we are so blessed to be here with you, Steve. Thank you once again. I'm going to ask Anna to guide us through the rest of this conversation. But today will be, I think, the start of many conversations with you and Alice. Thank you.
Thank you. And by the way, thank you for this opportunity, because it's germane, and that I've mostly been in an advisor corporate development role for the last decade, for about 15 years or 15 or 20 years, I ran units. So I wasn't necessarily a CEO, but I was a manager, leader of a team and so forth for most of my life. But for the last decade, I've mostly been a individual contributor advisor to CEOs, where I'm their corporate development guy. I help them raise capital, their strategy, and so forth. And in that role, you're kind of by definition externally focused and looking at everything, and it's filtering for the CEO, right? And so what I'm trying to transition now is to, I have to do that for myself inside of GKI, but then I need to focus it to give direction to my team. So I'm still very, I as the leader, it's easy for me to go chase, to do the things that I've been, you know, that part of the job feels natural. The other part of the job, it's been a while since I had that. And so I'm having to, but I have a very good COO, chief of staff. I think they identified that coming in, what my personality type is. So I think we work well together. The other thing I wanted to say is I was on a call earlier today with the dry run of the presentation for next week in Mexico City. So they still have a couple of iterations to go, but because they're trying to get something that's going to work for an audience and a global, you know, and trying to make it interactive. So it's not just you know, lift and do the same. You know, it's not just a regurgitation. It's really taking it and crafting it for you. So I think that will go well.
That's going to be beautiful. And thank you very much for this incredible sharing and this moment for us to come together here today and also in Mexico and many, many more. And we've got several of the leaders of the Mexico Congress right here with us. So we're really blessed to be able to hear you and share your thoughts, and I'm sure many inspirational ideas with incredible young people, academics, businesses, and governments that will be present. Thank you, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Going back to what Ash was saying towards what you mentioned about leadership, I really like how you gave us 3 concrete examples. I think this really makes us think about exactly how you said everyone has different strategies, but you have to find the one that makes it work for you. So thank you so much for that amazing answer. I would like to hand it over now to Ivan for his question, please.
Great. Hi, Ivan.
Hello, thank you so much. And thank you also for the great effort that you're putting on the contribution for the Congress in Mexico. We are really honored to have you there as well. So the question is, what are the key pieces of advice you will give to early stage founders on social impact companies? And how can they increase their impact while growing their business?
Sure. So just to be, we did jump over a question, so that's fine. I was waiting, but that's good. So, you know, in a sense, whether you are in the for-profit sector or the impact sector or the not-for-profit, everybody has to find a business model that works for them ultimately to be successful. And I think it's no different for an impact company, right? You have to really understand what your value proposition is and why it's different than what is currently available, right? So I think that one trap that people fall into in all elements, whether it's an NGO, whether it's a for-profit company, whether it's an impact company, is falling in love with their own strategy and idea and having blinders as to whether there is other things out there similar or you know, even exactly the same, or why their particular approach will get traction and be of interest to people, even though they in their heart and their mind it seems obvious to them. So I think having a very a realistic view of what it is you're trying to do and understanding how it fits and understanding whether there is a market ready for that type of approach to work. And if not, what are the barriers and how might I get past those barriers, either in modifying a little bit what I'm trying to do or in getting the right policies, or you know, it may be a more macro thing that you need in order to participate. So a second area is the alignment within the team. A lot of times there's a leader of an entity like that, but the team members that they bring on don't really embody it and understand what the purpose of the business is. And so I think that there a lot of times, my experience with early stage companies is that they're quite often led by very brilliant, motivated, passionate people, but they sometimes have trouble conveying that to the team that they put around them. And I think in particular for an impact company, everybody needs to be aligned on the mission and invested in it, and committed to it. And so that's a second sort of challenge. It's certainly none of these are anything that can't be surmounted, but they are just things that before you push off from shore, you want to make sure you've got your ducks in a row, as they say, on those levels. I do think that kind of going back to what Ash was talking about, how quickly things are changing. You need to figure out, how do I execute and stay focused on what I want to do, but also keep an eye on disruptive things coming down the pike. It could be a better approach. It could be a technology. It could be something that happens in the environment. And so I think and particularly for small companies, I think that's hard to do, because there's usually so much to do just to focus on what you're trying to get accomplished within your area of impact. A fourth area, I think, is measurement. And I'm getting ready to go to the SOCAP conference a week after next. And there are many tracks. Some of the tracks are on Africa, and this is a global, it's an impact investing conference. Some of the tracks are focused on domains like healthcare or agriculture. Some are focused on particular geography. Some are focused on things like fundraising. But there's a big track that I noticed there are a lot of presentations in, where people are trying to figure out, how do we measure impact? And I did have a friend, Jason Saul, who has a platform called Mission Measurement. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that. And Mission Measurement is a company. It serves the foundation world and the impact investing world, with attempts to create both accounting standards, but also operational standards, so that larger allocators of capital or larger foundations can look at different entities to see, well, how well is the pop movement doing versus, roots and shoots, let's say, and so figuring out how best to measure your impact from your perspective, but then also to understand how the outside world might want to measure, and being very expert in that, and being understanding that, and looking at other parallel organizations and how they measure up. I think it's an important thing for you to because I think that, and you may be fine with the metrics that are being used and how people are assessing impact, or you may have a different point of view, and there's an opportunity to get into that conversation and shift that, right? At conferences, by getting to know these service providers, because they're just out there in their own way trying to make an impact, and they are relatively coming up with somewhat novel and untested mechanisms. So the measurement of the company, I think, is important, and staying on top of how those measurements are evolving. Another key piece for, I think, anything you do, this is something I'm dealing with right now inside of GKI, is at what scale do we need to operate to be able to be sustaining? In the for-profit world, it's your break-even level, let's say. Once you're above your break-even level, you're making money, and at that scale, you can sort of survive without infusions of capital and so forth. And I think for any impact company, being realistic about what that is a critical thing, because I think one of the failures of a lot of companies is they underestimate what their break-even level really is, because there are a lot of costs that come along to invest in the platform. There are always some dislocations of things you don't, there are contingencies, things that happen that you don't anticipate. And a lot of people think that they will reach break even sometimes at lower thresholds. And I think if you're honest and really thoughtful about where that break even is, you may end up having to get more capital up front to sustain you, but you'll be in better position with your investors because you won't be coming to them with a surprise. And so I think that is and by the way, it's a hard thing to know because you're modeling these things, and models are only so good, but really that a lot of that is driven by unit economics. And so it's, or margin, if you will, where are you ultimately make, and quite often at scale, you may be very profitable at a unit level, but as you're starting out, there's a lot of friction that result in negative margins sometimes. So even though you're doing business, you're actually losing money on the transactions, even at the transaction level sometimes. And then the other thing I think is how that business or how that impact platform evolves over time. What's the plan? Is it is it one thing and it's doing it in one location? Is it something that you're going to broaden out to other geographies? Are there other products and services that you want to evolve in? So I don't think it's critical to have a super detailed multi-generational plan when you start out, but I think I tend to like to think in terms of knowing a lot about phase one, which might be 18 or 24 months, knowing a pretty good idea about what I want to do in phase two, and and sort of where that scale might get, and what kind of additional investment I might need. And then having an idea about a longer term phase three, where that's where I may get into expanding and diversifying and partnering and so forth. So those are all, probably more operational. I guess the other side, on the impact side, is more, do I have to look in the rearview mirror at, let's say I'm coming in to be an impact player in a segment that has only traditional competitors in it who are not very sustainable, who don't have a lot of climate change awareness and so forth. What happens when they get religion and they start to change their model? And I do think that sometimes there are pure impact companies who get superseded by veneer of impact from traditional companies who get clever in how they repack. Now, I've noticed this in the food industry a lot, where there has been a really lax enforcement of packaging standards, and it's allowed a lot of traditional companies to make claims and put small, wholesome companies that are actually doing the right thing with their ingredients and processes, but to knock them off of the shelf, right? Because the other person has more shelf. So that's more a little bit of a competitive analysis, and more about what happens when I get big enough that the incumbents recognize me. Am I going to be, do I have to go into business with them, or can I sustain as an independent? And can they do something to sort of disrupt my situation, screw up my distribution or my partner? So anyway, those are some ideas. I think they're applicable. Any thoughts on your end? Any experience on your end of any of those kind of elements?
Well, unless Ivan wants to add something, because I think both Ivan and I work in social companies. We both funded small social companies, and I feel like a lot of what you said really resonated with the process we had to go through. For example, at some point we realized we were very focused on the solution we were bringing to the table rather than being in love with the problem and being open to continue iteration. So I feel like that revelation was great for us to realize, how can we really add more value to what we're doing? And also what you mentioned about different phases, I think is also really interesting to keep in mind, so that we make sure that our plan aligns with what possible investors or possible allies want to know about the project in the future. I don't know if, Ivan, you would like to add something as well from your point of view.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna.
So on our case, I'm co-founder of a circular economy company, and in our case, we are really in love with the company, with the concept and how it works. However, we found out that it was quite difficult for us to let people understand what was like the project about. It's a little bit complex. I mean, it's easy, but it has so many different things related to it. So many people were getting lost on the way, and we had to learn how to pitch it properly. And maybe with this new approach, we will have to don't go deep into some things, but then people were starting to understand it better, and that was actually what we needed to make this work. So, but yeah, this is something that also we were learning like little by little and trial and error.
I think you actually, that's a very important point, which is that quite often entrepreneurs are focused on, they have to figure out the new solution, the disruptive solution. But you also have to kind of go a couple standard deviations up the supply chain and out to the customer and understand their particular situation in the moment. Because even though you may have the right solution, there may be other barriers, like for instance, just education, or even how am I going to get them to pay attention to this? Even, you know, so and I haven't calculated that I have to have a big marketing budget to, you know, to inform people about this thing, to get them they're not necessarily waiting for you, right? That's even though they should be, but they have too many other things in life, right? It's just not high enough on their list to be something that they could care about. So I think that's good. Well, I'm very impressed that both of you guys have been involved in social impact companies. Kudos to you. And I look forward to learning more about those efforts down the road.
Thank you so much, Steve, and thank you, Ivan, for the question. Steve, I really like how you opened also the floor to really engage with us as well, so that we can complement the points that you've made during the conversation. So thank you very much. For the next question, I would like to hand it over to Alejandra Fragoso, who's also joining us from Mexico.
Great.
Gracias, Ale.
Thank you so much. I just want to say one more time, thank you so much. I'm so grateful for being here and so honored. Please, I want to ask, what have been some of your most important learning experience from your global development projects across the world?
So this is, you know, right where I'm focused right now in particular. So I'm trying to figure out how to go upstream to private capital and impact investors and so forth. But where GKI has resided in the past is mostly working on behalf of the large multilaterals, the World Bank, USAID, the UN, Rockefeller Foundation, people like that, on development issues. And GKI's primary role is to develop locally led, multi-stakeholder, systems-informed innovation platforms, right, around important development challenges like climate, food security, gender inclusion, livelihoods, etc. Which sounds a lot like Terry, frankly, in the background that we had there. So on the global development side, and by the way, when I saw Ash, I was in New York for UN Global Assembly Week, and I went to a couple of DevEx. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of DevEx, but they are sort of a convener of the development world and a media company in the development world. And so they have conferences. So in a place like UN General Assembly, they'll have conferences running parallel so they can tap into a lot of the people that are there for that. So I went to two sessions, one on Tuesday and one on Thursday a couple of weeks back. And they cover a wide range of topics, but the Tuesday section was largely healthcare centered, and the Thursday, which is where I have been doing a lot of work before I came to GKI, and the Thursday session was focused on food security, and there were, you know, plenty of other issues touched on, but those were sort of some of the primary focal points. So I would say that there was a common theme coming out of this year's UN General Assembly and out of the DevEx conferences. And we are just really now coming out of the pandemic when you get into that world. So with COVID, everything on the healthcare side focused on the pandemic, and to the detriment of non-communicable diseases, which have kind of floundered the work against them in the last few years, so that there are now 850 million people with chronic kidney disease, 600 some odd million with diabetes, 500 million with cardio, and so forth. 1.4 billion people with hypertension. These are long-term chronic conditions that really are disabling for people. So globally, that makes us, let's call it, less productive than we could be as a humankind. And more importantly, they are driving the high cost of healthcare because these are chronic conditions that require constant attention. And so it's really a difficult situation. But in the face of a pandemic, the dollars flow to the short-term immediate need. And when you looked at the food side, it was largely the same. They had Baron Seeger, the head of the World Food Program, and 3 of his corporate board members. And they were emphasizing that so much of their activity from the pandemic and forward was being focused on disaster response, wars, famine, drought. Now we have another conflict happening, at a scale that's just atrocious. And so, and to the detriment of building long-term sustainable food systems that can provide food security. And oh, by the way, be more resilient when you do have a famine or a drought or a war or whatever, right? And so, so I think that I think this is a ongoing problem. I don't think this is particularly new to 2023. It may be exacerbated by the pandemic and so forth, but in general, this is and so the problem we have is governments are tapped out, and you have to take care of the short-term emergencies. And what loses out in that is the long term. And I think for people that are focused on things like climate change, you understand that completely. But I'm particularly focused right now in the area of food security. And so one of the solutions is bringing more capital to bear, and that capital is increasingly looking like private capital. And so that's a good thing, because there is a lot of capital sitting in the coffers of the large companies of the world. They're quite rich. They've got a lot of resources, and they truly want to be responsible and be supportive. So for instance, in the food area, the World Food Program, they have Cargill, UPS, and Google on their board. And those guys are rolling their sleeves up and really providing very important capital and like-kind services that sort of force multiply what the World Food Program can do on their own. But I had a good talk with the Cargill woman, and she's happy doing the work that they're doing with the World Food Program, but she's very anxious to also do more in building strong, resilient systems. So I'd say the first takeaway is there's a constant tension between building long-term sustainable systems and dealing with short-term emergencies. And probably the only way to solve that is by getting more capital in that can be focused on the long term, because a lot of the sort of traditional multilaterals and so forth and foundations and donors have so much current problem, and we just can't seem to get to a nice, peaceful, quiet year or two. It just seems we trip from one thing into the other. The second is there's a chasm between where development dollars leave off and private capital comes back. If you're familiar with the venture world, there was a book by a guy named Jeffrey Moore called Crossing the Chasm. And that was very much about what we were talking about before, about companies getting to scale and getting to a level where they can then attract lower cost capital to grow their businesses. And what happens is venture investors have to make a decision whether to keep investing in companies before they've crossed that chasm. And so it's sort of the challenge of the venture world. Okay. In the development world, the chasm happens slightly differently, which is large development projects get funded, but they don't really get funded for phase 2 and 3 quite often. They may have multiple phases in there, but not in the sort of phases of what's going on with what you're investing in. So what happens is, while the development dollars are flowing, things are going pretty well. But when the development dollars are done, they haven't left the platform that they built in a position where it can sustain. And so you've heard of many times, I'm sure, development efforts sort of petering out, and you're back to the drawing board. You go back to where you started from. And so it's not going to be easy to drag private capital across that chasm. Now, the one concept that is being perfected is the idea of blended finance. And so I think that will be a critical issue, because that is a way that the government can put up, say, $1, local investors can put up $2, and then foreign investors can put in $2. And the government takes first loss, but they force multiplied. They're now doing 5 times as much as they would have done with their initial 100. And the idea is that within that, that sort of subsidy, that's how you cross the chasm to where the next round of capital is self-sustaining. And that could be an agricultural system or a healthcare system. That could be an energy, a renewable energy infrastructure, anything that has some upfront cost, and then it runs, let's call it negative operating, for a period of time before it finally gets to that critical scale, that unit cost positive, where they can make money or pay for whatever that is. So short term versus long term, and then figuring out how to put together development dollars and private dollars in that to bridge that area as you're trying to get to a sustainable model. The third thing is, I think, also been underway now for maybe 15 years in a big way, and it's certainly at the center of where GKI operates, and that is trying to push decision making down to the to the local multi-stakeholder groups. So it's not that the dollars are still coming from Rockefeller, and a lot of the technology solutions are being developed, in the let's say the Western world or the North or whatever you want to call that, but they're not flying in and trying to do the implementation and decide what the answer is. They're trying to develop the local teams to decide, and then giving them some a la carte opportunities, but that the local guys develop the priorities and the strategy. I don't know if you look across all the effort of what's going on in global development, how much is actually operating that way and how much is operating well that way. I know that GKI and the work that we did in Bangladesh and the Caribbean recently on climate change resilience, that was the model that we were following there. And so I think it's a good thing that we're trying to go. It's sort of a post-colonial way of doing things. It's not necessarily going back to a pre-colonial approach, but it is going to an empowered approach for the local entity, but still getting support from the global development funds. So I think that's a critical issue, and getting better and better at assembling those local coalitions and networks is kind of what you guys are all about. So I think you're right in the right place at the right time. The other thing I would say is there is a need to build innovation ecosystems. So you can you can have a project and come up with a solution, but what you really want to do is have an ecosystem that is, like we talked about, continuing to generate new ideas and new approaches, because it's never going to be a silver bullet. It's never going to be one idea, and everything has to evolve. You want to create a culture of experimentation and adaptation and with new ideas, so leaving, but it's not just giving local decision making, but it's also building local capacity, right? In terms of, and so this was something that was a little difficult for me when I first came into GKI. I come out of the venture world, and the venture world's model is creative destruction, mass disruption. And the idea is Amazon, right? And what happens? Well, they're like, in their mind, it's inefficient to have all of these little stores and all of these little buckets of inventory everywhere. You know, we're going to have one massive thing, one-stop shopping, and you're going to be able to buy everything cheaper, faster, better, and, you know, with more knowledge, et cetera. And that is kind of how it works in the US. And what happens is companies that you thought would be around forever, all of a sudden go out of business because somebody else comes and disintermediates them with a better approach, and boom, they're gone. In the development world, we're really not trying to destroy the systems that are in place. We're trying to optimize them and get them to work better together. So it's an innovation. It's more of a systems innovation that we're focused on, as opposed to, you know, one guy coming with a great idea and then capturing all the spoils. Now, these things have to coexist. And in fact, the technologies that are being developed are important components. But the kind of development, the kind of innovation that we're looking at is more evolutionary and optimizing, as opposed to disrupting, I think. And I think that's a key distinction. And then the final thing, I guess, is critical mass. And that is where, you know, wherever you go and you're trying to do something, if you're trying to develop a new capability in a country, like, let's say you want to be a software development entity, critical mass, you know, you have to have critical mass. That is, there's a certain level of programmers talent that you need to be able to be a viable vendor to folks outside the country, right? And so, but the thing is, you constantly see countries popping up, you know, Ukraine, Bulgaria, Ghana, you know, different places where people are achieving that. So as you're down into a local geography and people trying to figure out what is it that we do well, what are our strengths, where might we build some other capacity to protect our economy in case whatever we mostly rely on goes through it, because things go through cycles. You know, what's our backup plan? People have to be realistic about what they have and what they can do. But I think that most anything is possible, but, you know, has to be approached in a methodical way. And I think sticking to you know, that systems innovation approach is a way that's likely to help you tease out what those are. So those are some things I've learned. Hopefully that's of interest and value.
Tremendous interest and value. And I think a lot of insights that are very valuable, especially for a number of the young people who are here thinking of, you know, eco ventures, of sustainable, you know, organizations and other practices and applications and innovation. So just want to thank you, Steve, for that, and Ale for the beautiful question. And thank you for your insights. Most valuable.
Thank you, Alondra.
I just want to say, I'm sorry. I just want to say I have total admiration for what you are doing and how you paved the way through action. I mean, it's extremely gratifying to listen to you, and also that thing that you are saying, that innovation must impact the next generation. I totally agree that we must keep on moving. We are keep of seeing what's the next step in this in the future.
So
want to say,
yeah, so I think as I think back to kind of the work that we used to do with Dr. Pachauri, or the work that he was doing and we were supporting, and I look at some of the vision of the large funders and what are we really trying to accomplish ultimately. I don't know if I've spoken, I think I've spoken to Ash about this, but I don't think I've spoken to this group about it. there is a group called FOLU that I speak about from time to time, the Food and Land Use Institute. And they're one of many. I mean, they're not by any means sort of, the only authority, but they have a framework that I'm particularly fond of. And they have, I think, tried to map out every hectare of land on the planet and assign it a use. And the punchline, when you look, and they work on behalf of they're funded by Rockefeller and a bunch of these other big folks focused on climate and food in particular. And Rockefeller is very locked into building regenerative food systems. That's kind of the buzzword of the moment. And the punchline is that if you look at the state of the world in 2030, we have a pretty good feel for what that, it's not going to change that much from where we are in 2023 in terms of how land is being used. And then you just extrapolate out kind of where we were in 2010, where we are in 2030, and where we're likely to be in 2050. It's not a very good place. And I think you probably know that while the problem of climate change is partly driven by power generation, also partly driven by transportation, it's also very much driven by agricultural practices. And so we are trying to get our hands around power generation by switching to renewables and also carbon capture and things of that nature. And likewise, with transportation, by trying to electrify the transportation sector, kind of pushing that into a place that we can then deal with either energy that's produced from the sun and therefore clean, or else at least capture the carbon in a place and not have it just propagating everywhere. But agriculture is a real problem, and one of the real problems is the way that the diets of the world have changed as the world has gotten richer, and the expansion of pasture land, which does all kind of things that are problematic. One, it becomes big methane producing areas, and two, it eliminates habitat for environment, which is a critical thing, and also habitat that can be oxygen producing and so forth. So when FOLU looks at 2050, they kind of model out what needs to happen if we're going to reach our targets on emissions and therefore, slow the negative impact of climate change. And the punchline there is that we need to reduce pasture land by like 2/3 and then redistribute that land into either habitat or into biodiverse agricultural solutions that are more oxygen producing. The only way to get there are many ways to get there, but one important thing is a massive change in the diet towards a plant-based diet for the planet. Now, there are a lot of young people for whom I think this is actually possible, that it could happen, because properly educated and with enough innovation and quality of food and all that sort of stuff, it may just be a natural thing, and hopefully it will be. But it's not going to be, it's not trivial, because at the same time as nations get richer, they tend to move from fish to chicken to pork to beef, unfortunately. And so for every time you claw back a little bit of gain in the US or in Europe, you have, wealthier populations in China and India and other places now saying, hey, I want a seat at the table and I'm going to enjoy myself just like you have. Right. And so it's an ethical dilemma, because what's good for the globe is also unfair to ask of individuals in a lot of ways. And so I think that this is the challenge, right? Which is our individual actions are important. And but at the same time, we're human beings with wants and needs and desires, and it hasn't been fairly distributed. And there are people coming into the game saying, wait a second, I just got here and now you're pulling the rug out from under me and expecting me to, to not pursue what I've been working towards. So I think that the challenge, and I'll give you one example. I'm working on a proposal. I'm hoping that GKI and some partners will be successful on getting a food security project going in Zambia. And Zambia is 11 million people. it will grow, but it could develop a local solution that's not particularly in harmony with the FOLU pyramid. And the FOLU pyramid is a simultaneous equation that looks at greenhouse gases, it looks at food security, it looks at gender inclusion, it looks at livelihoods, it looks at habitat for the environment. It's trying to solve for all these problems, right? How can we hit our climate goals and still hit all our other, in a sense, it's a high level aggregation of SDGs, but it's particularly the ones that are germane to climate, let's say, but also to human beings' livelihoods as well, right? You could get to climate by really, crushing livelihoods, right? And that's one way to get there. But how do you sustain growth and wealth, and at the same time reach your climate goals? So for Zambia, the challenge is to create the local multi-stakeholder group to navigate the way forward over the next 10 or 20 years towards a world of food security where individual citizens have access to high quality, fortified, and protein rich diets that they don't necessarily have today. There's a gap between probably what you would aspire to and what's really happening on the ground. How do you balance out local smallholder, generally women-led agriculture with the maize economy that has now made its way into Zambia, which is having success and creating export earnings, but maybe crowding out diversity and maybe aquaculture, which is really needed for the protein deficiency, and so forth. And then how do you make sure that a country like Zambia can compete and can get access to the critical inputs, and then also have enough market power to get that? And I'll give you an example. A country like Cambodia is in a very difficult spot right now because they've sort of been co-opted by China. I think there's probably, I don't know if anybody from Cambodia is on this call, but my understanding is that the current leadership has maybe traded some agency and sovereignty for Chinese capital in a way that has put some constriction on the economy. And the agricultural segment is pretty primitive in a sense that they are one of the world's great producers of, for instance, cashews. But almost all of the value gets created in Vietnam, right? Because they can't invest in a lot of the value-added processing, partly because the China tie-up has put them on a bad list with the US. That's always problematic. But more importantly, they don't have the rule of law, transparency that you need to have private capital come in and put in place machinery and processing that would be required, right? So I didn't mean to get off on a geopolitical rant, but that's just another dimension that has to be considered. So I think what I'm trying to answer is your question of what can we do? And I think it breaks down at two levels. What can you do as the individual is, again, be authentic to you and don't take it, don't be too harsh with yourself. You need to live a life and you need to be generous with other people, and you shouldn't be, you can have strong beliefs. You need to be moderate in how much you try to project them onto other people. Everybody has to be their own person. You can lead through action and hopefully the world, and you can lead through education and hopefully the world will follow, but not through, I think, being a bully about it or something. And then at the country level, countries need to figure out what makes sense for them. But I think that also needs to be put through the filter of how does this fit for the global imperatives as well. And I think that was what Dr. Pachauri was always very interested in. He wanted local, he believed in the local, he believed in the village, but he also knew the village had to be in harmony also with the globe. And so I think that's the challenge, and that's kind of about you as the individual, that you need to be yourself, your authentic self, but you also need to be in harmony with the globe. So I think it all works on the same scale.
Wow, that's extraordinary. Please, yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that's a lot of food for thought for us, especially as the POP movement is a very grassroots organization, and you talked about action, and you talked about the importance of maintaining that synchronicity. It does take a village. The village has to come together, but we also have to have the exchange at a global level. And I think that's very, very precious, very precious insight. Thank you. I'll let Anna take us forward, please. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Norma. I know you need to be. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. I really like how you have really integrated so many examples and on the ground situations where we can see how everything plays out, and how what you are sharing with us really happens on a global scale, a country scale, and also a smaller scale. And I know we are running a little bit over time, so just to go to the final question and kind of doing it in towards the conclusions, I would like to ask you if you could briefly talk to us about how we can all contribute to global development and supporting these global goals from our different areas of interest. And also, I would like to apologize. I do need to move into my phone, so I will have to turn my camera off. But okay. I'm really looking forward to listening to your answer.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I feel like the last question, my last answer maybe was somewhat addressing that. So I think if you don't mind, because I may have misheard the question, because I think that was the question I was trying to answer, which is what we can do on global development. So Anna, if it's okay, I thought maybe I would just close by maybe just sharing a little bit about Dr. Pachauri.
Please.
Of course, yeah, that would be amazing. Yeah. And sorry about that. I did realize that you were also answering part of the last question, but I didn't want to leave it apart. But yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, just okay. So first of all, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure and a very great opportunity for me. It's always helpful for me to be able to speak these things and try to, we're working on very complex things, and how to there's so many dimensions to them, and how to make them accessible and understandable. You guys are a unique audience because you're pretty brilliant. You're really all over this. So that's probably not the average audience I get to talk to. But I appreciate the opportunity. It's been very good and helpful for me. So I just want to say a couple things about Dr. Pachauri. I think I mentioned to Ash that I met him in September of 2002, a year after 9/11. I came to India with Sam Pitroda, and we spent time in Mumbai, and then went to Delhi. And I'm sorry, we were in Mumbai, then in Kolkata, and then we came to Delhi. And we were there speaking to, there was a big convening in Kolkata of the Indian Chamber of Commerce, I believe, and Sam and I both spoke there. We spoke at a bunch of places in Mumbai, and then we came to Delhi, where Sam had lived for a long time, and we're meeting with various folks. And we went to a cocktail party at Dr. Pachauri's house, and Sam had been telling me I needed to meet Dr. Pachauri, because he knew what my interests were. Sam, another incredible Indian born individual, lives in the US, the father of telecom in India in a lot of ways, probably the senior advisor to Rahul Gandhi. I know right now trying to get him, get Congress Party back in power. But Sam is an incredible entrepreneur, and very, very much of the people, and focused on making life better, and a father, in a lot of ways, an important developer of cell phone technology, and always believed that telecommunications would be a big driver to help individuals realize their true capabilities. So he's a very, very important person in my life. My youngest son is named after him. He's a real mentor and father figure for me, and we've known each other for a long time. And he knew a lot about me. He said, "You really need to meet Dr. Pachauri. He's the guy in climate change, and I know how much that's important to you." And I never forget his smile how warm. I mean, I felt like the minute I met him and shook his hand, that I was going to be a good friend of his. You know, you just meet people like that once in a while. And he was having a lot of fun, and there was a lot of energy, and it was a beautiful, you know, the weather was beautiful. It was just one of those really nice situations, right? And for me, you know, I was one of, I'd been to India a few times, but nevertheless, you know, it's always amazing when you go. And so my eyes were wide open. And so we quickly started exchanging information, and he asked me to come on to the board of TERI North America, and to become a speaker at the Delhi Sustainable Development Summit, and then a member of the steering committee there. And so I was basically a fixture for the next decade with him, while he was also simultaneously running the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And so I would travel to India every year, speak at that event, help him, you know, with agendas and things like that, introduce a lot of people to DSDS, brought a lot of people there, brought new people to the board of TERI. So, you know, was just a big believer in what he was trying to accomplish. We had some really interesting activities around Light a Billion Lives. There was a seminal event in Washington, D.C., and John Kerry was there, and Al Gore was there. And you could just see every time, you know, we go to events, just how respected Patchy was, and how committed to he was, but also how wise he was in terms of the words he chose and the way he was able to push the agenda forward. You know, there was a big meeting at the Asia Society where Lonnie Thompson was there presenting, and you know, it was no secret to me because I'd been seeing him present at the Delhi Sustainable Development Summit. It was just the latest iteration, showing the glacial retreat in the Himalayas, and what was happening on the third pole, and what kind of problems that was going to cause, and you know, the river systems of Asia that so many people depend on, and also what's interesting is there's now a movie out called Canary, just in the last few months, which is essentially, you know, the coming to grips with what, you know, with Dr. Pachauri was talking about in 92 and 2002 and 2007. But it just shows, you know, everything eventually will get there. You know, you have to have some faith. Finally, you know, there was a period of time where Patchy got to spend time up in New Haven, which is only about 40 minutes from me. So I saw him quite a bit then. Annapurna was there quite a bit as well. So I saw her and got to know her son. And, you know, it was just something that I took as an important part of my life. It was just my hobby, basically. You know, and I always wanted to make it more of my job. And so now with GKI, you know, I'm sort of finally doing what my, you know, because I was more on the commercial side all those years. And but I just want to say that I'm very committed to Patchy, and a big believer, and just so proud of, you know, that when he got that Nobel Prize, it was just like, I felt so good about that. And I'm disappointed that the world has, you know, takes so long, but I understand it's complex, and I understand a lot more now than I did. There was a period of time where I got kind of depressed about the pace of things, and, you know, particularly in the last administration that we had, and just the total abandonment and you know, sort of some of the perverse things that happened that were just, to me, so awful and just mean spirited and stuff. But you know, it's there's no accounting for how bad people can be, unfortunately. So, but we have to rise above it. So, and I think what's great is that in aggregate, you just see things like POP and all of the people that Ash is assembling underneath this movement. And for me, it inspires me. And because I know that that's really where the action is where you guys are. You're the future, and the future is happening where you're living. And you know, so I hope to stay connected. I hope we can find ways to work together. And I just thank you very much for the opportunity to talk today, and honored to be the 51st conversation for POP.
Well, it's just profoundly meaningful. I really, Anna, please. I know you're switched on your camera to say a few words. I'll go after you, but I keep it brief for sure.
Oh, thank you, Ash. No, I just really want to thank you, Steve, for your time and really giving us such well thought out answers. I think every single answer could be a conversation by itself. Really, everything you taught us today has been so interesting. So thank you so much for taking the time of sharing with us and of teaching us about all your work and how we can all contribute to global development. And I'll hand it to you, Ash.
I want to echo your sentiments, Anna, and I know it's on behalf of the entire family. Steve, thank you. I think that there's just such a wealth of wisdom that you've shared with us, experience that you've shared with us, and of course many new areas that we will traverse together. So I just want to say it's a privilege and an honor. We would want to certainly request your continued conversation, this continued conversation with you and with Alice. I think we'll be able to do a lot together, no doubt, and we are looking forward to the follow on from here. It is very meaningful in a way. I want to say that on Dad's birthday, August 20th, we marked the 50 conversations that had taken place over a period of time since 2020, 2021. But just after your birthday, we marked the first 51st one. So it's very special. We really want to say that this is a great privilege and a real tribute to Dad and his vision and his legacy as we come together to protect our planet, to mobilize the youth of the world, to support the action, to do it with education. And I want to say again that GKI has some amazing tools and strategies and really practical approaches to supporting, I believe, very closely the youth of the world. And I hope with the POP movement, we'll be able to join minds and hearts in making this happen. And so we're looking forward to that follow-up. And also there are some important things that are coming up at the COP. We would love to talk to you about those. And I think the opportunities are infinite. So just to say that we venture into this universe of many wonderful things, but I think most of all with that beautiful spirit and the wisdom that you bring to the fore and so much experience. We're really looking forward to a lot more together, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in person again soon too. And I think the next one is next week, but there'll be lots and lots more, and you'll see many members of the family there. So I hope we'll have a chance to bring the rest of the POP family to the fore too. And as you know, we have a lot of work happening in Africa, and I know you have tremendous activities there too. So Africa, Asia, all over. So we're really looking forward to this. And thank you very much once again, Steve, and to the rest of the POP family. You're part of our family, and we're blessed and grateful for it. So I'd love to get a picture if you can before we go, Steve. I'll share that with you. But if for those who can turn on their cameras, I'll just quickly get a screen grab, and we'd love to treasure this time together for a long time, eternally. Thank you. I'm gonna switch. I'm gonna get a screen grab. Thank you all so much. And Steve, once again, thank you, and many happy returns.